at all levels. We know that outcome-based education means it is clearly defined learning achievements that the students are expected to demonstrate at the end of the course or program. The expected outcomes of NEP 2020 orientation and sensitization program are holistic development, employability and innovation, integration of Indian ethos with global standards, and institutional excellence and social contributions. Today, our resource person is going to enlighten our minds through his knowledge and experience. Let me call upon Dr. S. Vimala Karthiyayani, Assistant Professor of History Department in Crescent College of Education for Women, to welcome the resource person and introduce the resource person. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ma'am. Good afternoon to one and all present here. It's my pleasure to welcome our resource person on behalf of our college, Crescent College of Education for Women, Madurai and Aligarh Muslim University. Am I audible, ma'am?
Yes, Vimala.
Yeah.
Okay. Professor has got his undergraduate degree in electronics engineering from Aligarh Muslim University and PG degree from IIT Kanpur. He bagged his first rank and was awarded with gold medal in his UG degree. After completing his PG degree, he joined as a member of faculty in the electronics department at Aligarh Muslim University. Slowly, by his hard work, sincerity and dedication, from lecturership, he raised up to the position of reader in the Department of Computer Science Engineering at Aligarh Muslim University. He completed his doctoral degree at IIT Delhi in the year 2004. He also visited the University of California at Berkeley as a British Telecom Fellow from November 2005 to October 2006. He served in many institutions holding various positions. From August 2015 to November 2024, he served as a principal of ZH College of Engineering and Technology. Right now, he is a professor in the Department of Computer Science Engineering at Aligarh Muslim University. Sir has published 29 book chapters, 165 research papers on a wide range of topics in the web mining and soft computing. He has been an invited lecturer at many places in India, USA, UK. He has served as a reviewer and has been on the board of many reputed journals and conferences also. His current research interests are in the area of parallel and distributed processing, soft computing, questioning and answering systems, natural language processing, web mining and searching. We are incredibly fortunate to have a leader of his caliber with us today. Nowadays, many of the premier institutes' goals is to focus on outcome-based education, course outcome, program-specific outcome, program educational objectives. Therefore, the outcome-based education is very vital for any institution to ensure its quality. Hope this program will have a lot of takeaway and will be useful for us. Our resource person is here to give us a detailed description in this vital concept of current educational trend. His insight will be invaluable as we explore outcome-based education. I welcome our resource person and leave this forum to him to give an eye-opening on the topic outcome-based education. Once again, I welcome you, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much for introducing me. So today we'll be discussing outcome-based education and quality assurance. And my prime objective would be to see how outcome-based education is going to ensure quality for us, right? That is what we'll be looking into. So as has already been told, I'm a professor of computer engineering at the Zakir Hussain College of Engineering and Technology, Aligarh Muslim University, Aligarh. Now, the first and the foremost question that comes to our mind is whether we can quantify quality. That is the first and the foremost question. Because these two terms, quantity and quality, they seem contradictory to us. We think that if we are talking about quality, we shouldn't be talking about quantity. And when we are talking about quantity, we shouldn't be talking about quality. But that's not quite true. Because one sentence that connects both quantity and quality is, what you can't measure, you can't control. If we can't measure anything, we won't be able to control that thing either. For example, if we can't measure temperature, we won't be able to control temperature. If we can't measure speed, we won't be able to control speed. Suppose I'm driving on a highway and somebody covers the speedometer. So on the highway, it is just not possible for me to gauge the speed of my vehicle, whether I'm driving at 100 kilometers per hour or 120 kilometers per hour or beyond. So I can't do a speed check on my vehicle because I'm not able to measure speed. I'm not able to gauge speed. So likewise, if I continue, if I can't measure quality, I won't be able to control quality either. So in that sense, quantifying quality becomes a must. I must find out a way to quantify quality. So the bottom line remains that assessing the attainment of quality is the key to quality control and enhancement. Obviously, whenever we are talking about quality control, I should be talking about enhancement only. Nobody wants to bring the quality down. Unlike speed, where you want the speed to go up or the speed to be brought down, the quality has always to be on the rise. So that is why when I say quality control, I must mean the enhancement, right? So that is why I need to assess the attainment of quality of education in order to control and enhance it. Now, what are the levels of quality in education? The first and the foremost level is approval. So that requires the bare minimum facilities. Suppose the classrooms are there, the teachers are employed, library is there, labs are there, you provide approval. In the area of technical education, the All India Council for Technical Education provides the approval. Now, you want to go a step further up. You must have heard about ISO, International Organization for Standardization. So just as ISO certification is there for the goods, the ISO certification is there for the services as well, and more so for educational services. Now we start talking about quality. What is the quality of classrooms? Are they smart classrooms? Do I have the teaching aids there? What is the qualification of teachers who are employed? Whether the books are of the latest edition in the library or not? Whether the equipments are of the latest technology in the lab? So we start talking about quality. Should we stop there? No. There is a further level that we take when we talk about accreditation. Because accreditation is not just about quality check, it brings in the very important notion of mutual recognition. Now, in order to understand this mutual recognition, let us first understand our ground reality, a basic reality. Many of you may not be knowing it from before, so try to understand it properly. See, in India, no university can become a university unless passed by an act of law. I'm repeating. In India, no university can become a university unless passed by an act of law. So it cannot happen that I open an institution and I start calling it as a university. No, there has to be a law enacted somewhere. Now, if that happens to be a law of the Indian Parliament that has brought that university into existence, then it becomes a central university. If that law has been passed by a state legislative body, then it becomes a state assembly, a state university. So the categorization of being a central university or a state university is not based on funding. The funding may be coming from anywhere, or there may be private universities. This funding is coming from nowhere. How will you categorize such universities as either central university or state university? So it's not about funding. It is about where the law has been enacted to bring that university into existence. Right? So the act is paramount. It may happen that many universities may have a combined university act, but there has to be an act. So, for example, the university that I teach in, the Aligarh Muslim University, it has the AMU Act. Likewise, there is BHU Act for Banaras Hindu University and so on. So, act is paramount. Now, this act is going to be a very, profound document. So its details will be given in the statutes. That will be further described in ordinances, and that will be further elaborated in the regulations. So it may happen that the ordinance and regulations may further be categorized into either administrative ordinance or academic ordinance. Likewise, administrative regulation or academic regulation. So now the power is percolating down. The act has drawn its power from the legislative body, the parliament or the state assembly. It has passed the power on to the statutes. The statutes have passed on the metal to ordinance and then to regulations. Now suppose there is a vice chancellor of a university. So that vice chancellor will draw power from the acts and statutes, which in turn will draw power from the legislative body. The vice chancellor will appoint a pro vice chancellor, a dean, a proctor, or the HOD. So that pro vice chancellor or dean or HOD will draw power from the vice chancellor, who in turn will draw power from act and statutes, which in turn will draw power from the legislative body. So that is how power percolates down. Any decision taken by the vice chancellor is tenable in law, right? So that will withstand in the court if there is a case like that. Likewise, this mutual recognition comes from the accord or the agreement signed by several countries to the effect that we will mutually recognize the degrees accredited by the respective boards of the countries, of the signatory countries, right? So this mutual recognition is very important. So I'll elaborate on it a little further, a little later. Right now you must have about two bodies, NAC and NBA. NAC provides institute-wide accreditation, whereas NBA provides degree-specific accreditation. So if they both of them have their own pros and cons. For example, NAC provides the accreditation to an institution, so all the degrees awarded by that institution stand accredited. Whereas NBA is degree specific. If it is given to BTech in computer engineering, it stays with BTech in computer engineering. You can't stretch it to BTech in electronics and communication or BTech in information technology or even MTech in computer science and engineering. This is very degree specific. The advantage is that the NBA does not want that the weaker degrees should pull down the stronger degrees. They say that if there is a strong degree, let it be accredited, and if there is a weak degree, let it be left out. Let it not be an institute-wide accreditation. Right? Now, what is accreditation in the first place? This is one of the definitions that I am sharing with you. You might be wondering that why I'm saying one of the definitions. Definition has to be unique. True. But if there's something which is very diversified, then you may find several explanations and definitions of it. Let me remind you of the good old story that you must have heard in your childhood days, that a few blindfolded persons were asked to touch an elephant and describe it. So the blindfolded person who touched the trunk of the elephant, he said it's like a python. The blindfolded person who touched the legs of the elephant, he said it's like a tree trunk. The person who touched the tummy of the elephant, he said it's like a wall. The person who touched the ears of the elephant, he said it's like a big hand fan. So the same animal being described differently by different people because the animal is too vast to be described in a single description. So likewise, accreditation is a vast term. So you may find other definitions too. I am sharing this definition because I like it the most. Now, what does it say? Formal recognition of an educational program or institution, as the case may be. Program in the case of NBA and institution in the case of NAC, as just now I have pointed out. By an external agency, I have underlined it. I'll tell you why. On the basis of impartial assessment, again impartial, I have underlined, of the attainment of specific requirements against well-defined criteria. Now the first underlined term, external agency. That is a must for the accreditation to come in force. You cannot say that we will be impartial, let us have an internal accreditation. No, that will not be allowed because there is conflict of interest. Suppose there is a selection committee in which my younger brother or my son is appearing. I may go on begging that I will be very impartial and I'll not do any undue favor. Please make me a part of the selection board. I'll not be allowed because I have a clear conflict of interest. So likewise, an internal agency will have a clear conflict of interest with the process of accreditation vis-a-vis that institution. So the first and the foremost condition is that the accreditation has to be carried out by an external agency. On top of it, the external agency should also be carrying out impartial assessment. What do I mean by impartial assessment? See, there are two terms, objective and subjective. We teachers and students have a very narrow perception of objectivity and subjectivity. Whenever the term objective is mentioned, immediately it springs to our mind that multiple choice questions, fill in the blanks, true, false. And subjective means essay type. That is correct, but that is a very narrow perception. When I say objective, it means whether Mr. A evaluates or Miss B evaluates or Mrs. C evaluates, the marks will remain the same, right? Whereas in the subjective essay, the same essay may be given 8 out of 10 by one teacher and 8.5 out of 10 by another teacher and maybe 9 out of 10 by yet another teacher. So when I say impartial, it should be objective. It should not be subjective, that you change the team and the scores change. It should be as far objective as possible. So both external agency as well as impartial assessment, both have to be in place for the accreditation to be accepted. And last but not the least, there has to be a well-defined criteria. The rules of the game have to be told before the game begins. You can't go on changing the goalpost after the game has already begun. So you declare that, look, these are the criteria that I'm going to evaluate you on for the process of accreditation. Let people prepare. If they don't prepare even then you have every right to keep them devoid of accreditation, to refuse them accreditation. But the criteria has to be told beforehand. See, this is the problem with us. Once I went to the Delhi airport to pick an elderly person. So I wanted to drive the car to as close the pickup point as possible. There was this policeman sitting. So I drove in front of him slowly so that if he has to stop, he'll stop me. But that policeman did not stop me. So I kept on driving I picked that elderly person. And when I was coming back, the policeman stopped me. Why did you go into the no entry zone? I said, there is nowhere it is written that it is a no entry zone. He said, you didn't see that I am sitting here. I said, okay, I drove in front of you slowly. You should have stopped me then. So you know what he said? He said, if I had stopped you then, how would I have caught you now? So our tendency is not to prevent the crime. Our tendency is to catch the criminal. That should not be the spirit. As teachers also, when we are doing the invigilation duty, our motive should be to stop the students from using unfair means. It shouldn't be that we allow them to use unfair means and then we catch them, right? So the criteria has to be told so that the people can prepare accordingly. So let me sum it up. Formal recognition of an educational program or institution, as the case may be, by an external agency on the basis of impartial assessment of the attainment of specific requirements against well-defined criteria, right? Now, accreditation in India, as I just now said, institutional accreditation by National Assessment and Accreditation Council, NAC, which is an autonomous body established by the University Grants Commission in 1994. For technical programs, you have National Board of Accreditation, diploma level to postgraduate level in engineering, management, architecture, pharmacy, hospitality, and mass communication, and the list may go on, right? They may go on adding more subjects. Now, what is the significance of accreditation? At national level, it is easier for students and parents to select the institutions and programs for admission. If the degree or the institution is accredited, go for it, because that will be accepted in all the signatory countries. If it is not accredited, you may not take admission because the degree may or may not be accepted, right? It helps employers in deciding about the institutions for recruitment of graduates. The employers may be assured that since we have accreditation, we do have some basic level of quality with us. That may be there. And it helps institutions to avail the benefits from regulatory bodies and funding agencies. You must have heard about grade 1 autonomy by UGC, grade 2 autonomy, grade 3 autonomy. There are certain privileges that were given on the basis of NAC scores. So that all comes from the NAC accreditation scores. Likewise, in our engineering college at the Aligarh Muslim University, we could get a hefty funding of 15 crores from World Bank under the TechIP phase 2, because all of our degrees were accredited by the National Board of Accreditation. That was one of the deliverables, that the degrees must be accredited. And again, we could get another funding of 7.7 crores under phase 3 of TechIP. So it helps the institutions to avail the benefits from regulatory bodies and funding agencies, right? I could see a question that what is the criteria for autonomous institutions? That is a separate question. If time permits, I'll take it towards the end. It helps institutions in deciding about transfer of students or exchange of students from other institutions, right? That also is easy. Suppose there are two institutions, both of them are accredited, so they are at the same level. You can seamlessly exchange students between them, they are at the same level. But suppose there is one institution which is accredited and another institution which is not accredited. They are not at the same level. So in order to exchange students, you will have to carry out all the exercise of degree equivalence, course equivalence, and whatnot, right? So these were the benefits at the at the national level as far as accreditation significance is concerned. At international level, the mobility of students for pursuing either higher studies or employment in other countries. right? So what do I mean by mobility for the purpose of higher studies and employment in other countries? I'll elaborate on my next slide. Global mobility. There are multinational accords for mutual recognition of accrediting process and thereby recognizing the accreditation. For example, Washington Accord in 1989 for engineering degree programs, Sydney Accord was signed in 2001 for engineering diploma polytechnic programs, Dublin Accord in 2002 for engineering technician programs, Seoul Accord in 2008 for professional engineers in computing and IT related fields. So let me take the example of Washington Accord. This was an accord signed among 6 countries to begin with: Australia, Canada, Ireland, New Zealand, UK, US in the year 1989. What does it mean? If the Ireland Board of Accreditation provides accreditation to a degree or an institution, that will have to be necessarily accepted by Australia, New Zealand, Canada, UK, and United States. They cannot refuse to accept the degree by virtue of the law, by virtue of the agreement and the accord that they have signed. Similarly, if a degree is accredited by the New Zealand Board of Accreditation, all the signatory countries, Australia, Canada, Ireland, UK, United States, are duty bound to accept and honor that degree. They just cannot refuse. So the purpose was to mutually recognize and accept the qualifications accredited by signatories. The accord at present has 15 full signatories and 5 provisional signatories. The list may keep going up or down. You might be wondering, the list should keep going up. Why is it going down? Let me take a hypothetical example, may not be a realistic example. Suppose Ukraine happens to be a part of any agreement. Now, war breaks out there. So the country of Ukraine may withdraw from that accord. They can say that, look, I cannot honor the accord by accepting the degrees awarded by the signatory countries. You are also free not to accept the degrees awarded by our Board of Accreditation. So this way the list may keep going down or up. More countries may keep adding also. Now, members of Washington Accord have outcome-based accreditation. So see, outcome-based education is drawing power from the Washington Accord, the agreement signed by several countries. Now, many more countries have been added. India has also been added to it. What are the different accreditation models? Minimal model is the first and the foremost one. The problem with it is it does not encourage continuous improvement. We go by what we are today. We are not futuristic. See, there is a problem with the developing countries. Suppose I have to build a bridge. I look at the traffic data as of today. By the time the bridge gets completed, the traffic has already exceeded its design. The bridge has already fallen short. What do the developed countries do instead? They extrapolate the traffic data for next 15 years, 20 years, and they design the bridge accordingly. And they attach an expiry date to that bridge. That bridge must be re-evaluated after 15 years or 20 years. So they sit down after 15 years and see whether the traffic has reached its limits or not. In case it hasn't, they may continue for another 5 years. And if it has, they will bring the bridge down and they will come up with another bridge. So minimal model does not encourage continuous improvement. It is not futuristic in that sense. Then the next level is input-output model. You look at the quality of students admitted and the quality of graduates emerging out of an educational institution. Next comes outcome-based model. Suppose there is a farmer. I give him the most fertile piece of land, the best seeds, best fertilizers, ample amount of water. But the crop is not up to the mark. So that means there is something fundamentally wrong with the farming process. What ultimately matters for the farmer? It is the crop, or more appropriately, the yield, which matters for the farmer, right? So likewise, what we should look in an educational institution is the quality of graduates emerging out of it. Why should I be concerned about the quality of students admitted? What matters for me is the quality of graduates emerging out of that educational institution, right? Obviously, in order to have a good quality of graduates coming out of an educational institution, I need to have a reasonably good quality of students admitted. But what should I measure? I should measure the crop or the yield or the outcome, right? So what is outcome-based education now? Outcome-based education is starting with a clear picture of what is important for students to be able to do, then organizing the curriculum, delivery, and assessment to make sure learning happens. You set the bar first. You set the goal first. Suppose there is an athlete who has to take a high jump. So he or she will set the bar first. Then try to assert to cross that bar. It never happens that the athlete says, let me jump, then you can measure how high have I jumped. There is a weightlifter, he'll set the weights first. He'll assert to lift that weight. If he's able to lift, he'll add more weight to it and then try to lift it again. So it always happens that we set the goal first and assert to achieve that goal. You might be wondering that I'm giving the examples from the area of sports and we are talking about outcome-based education. So let me give you an example from the educational realm also. You pick up any good book. In the beginning of every chapter, the author tells you what all are the learning points from this chapter. How does it help? You are extra cautious while reading that chapter. Whenever you come across any of those learning points, you get extra cautious. Oh, this thing we had to learn. Now, after you finish the chapter, in the summary, the author says that you have learned this. So now you assess whether you have learned all those points during the reading of that chapter or not. In case you haven't, you will go back to the beginning of the chapter and start all over again. So it always happens, we try to set the goal first and then we try to achieve that goal, right? So likewise, in the outcome-based education, you set the clear picture of what is important for students to be able to do. Then you assert by means of setting up the curriculum accordingly, by setting up the delivery of the course accordingly, and by setting up the assessment of the course accordingly, so that learning happens towards the goal that you have set. So pictorially, outcome-based education is what the students should be able to do. Then organizing the curriculum and learning teaching to make students achieve the outcome. And finally, you assess. Finally, you assess to measure what the students have achieved. So this is outcome-based education. Now, in order to understand the outcome-based education, this pyramid is very important. You have to understand this pyramid. I'll take all these levels one by one. So please pay attention to what I'm going to discuss. First thing to notice is that the design is from top to bottom, whereas the assessment goes from bottom to up, which means I have to set the vision first, followed by mission in order to reach that vision, then program educational objectives to reach the mission, then program outcomes to reach the program educational objectives, and the course outcomes to reach the program. So design has to go from top to bottom. Graduate attributes are the qualities that the students should have at the time of graduation. So they are graduate attributes. So program outcomes are aligned with graduate attributes. When you adopt those graduate as attributes to the specific program that you're talking about, they become program outcomes. At the time of assessment, you have to assess the attainment of course outcomes first. Then you have to assess the attainment of program outcomes, and then the assessment of PEOs and so on. Right? So the design goes from top to bottom, whereas the assessment goes from bottom to up. Now let us take these levels one by one. First and the foremost, what is the difference between vision and mission? In order to understand vision, let me tell you a story. When we were students of BTech over here, we had a professor of mechanical engineering who had an old Fiat car. Those were the times when only two cars were found in India, either Fiat or Ambassador. Any third car was supposed to be an imported car. So he had an old Fiat car, at the back of which was a sticker which read, "When I grow up, I want to be a Rolls Royce." Sounds funny. An old Fiat car, the sticker at the back of it is saying, "When I grow up, I want to be a Rolls Royce." But that is a very good example of what the vision has to be like. What do you want to become after 20 years, 30 years? What do you want your institution to grow into after 50 years, 60 years, whatever? So that is vision. Mission are the shorter goals to achieve vision. If some of you have studied computer science and there is a paper on operating systems, you must have come across the term long-term scheduling and short-term scheduling. Even if you haven't studied operating system, the very names will tell you that when I say long-term, I mean vision. When I say short-term, I mean the mission. Right? Suppose a player wants to become the number one player in the whole world. That is his or her vision. In order to reach that vision, he or she will set up shorter goals. How many runs am I going to score in this series? How many wickets am I going to take? How many catches am I going to hold? So match by match, series by series, as he or she keeps meeting his or her missions, a day would come that he or she would become the number one player. So the same design, first you have to set the vision, and then in order to reach that vision, you have to decide what should be your mission statements, right? So this is about vision and mission. How do I get the vision mission? What is the process of articulation of vision and mission? You won't get it in your dream. That look, I slept last night and in my dream I got the vision and mission of my institution or the department. That will not happen. And even if it happens, please don't adopt it, because you have found it the easy way. Whatever you get the easy way, you don't strive to achieve it. So let there be a process in place to articulate the vision and mission. And what is that process? Follow that process. First and the foremost, you have to align your department vision and mission with the institute vision and mission. Now, two questions arise here. Why am I talking about department vision and mission? Why? What will be the process of institute vision and mission articulation? See, I'm talking about department vision and mission because I'm assuming all of you are young faculty members. So you must be concerned more about your department vision and mission as of now. A day would come when you will become the directors, the principals, or the vice chancellors. Then you will be worried about institute vision and mission. So that day, what will be the process? The process will remain the same for institute mission and vision as well. It is just that the institute vision and mission will have to be aligned with the vision and mission of the founder. Whosoever the founder is, the trust or the society or a person, whosoever. The institute vision mission will have to be aligned with the vision and mission of the founder. The department vision and mission will have to be aligned with the institute vision and mission. Now, the second question that arises is, what is the need of alignment in the first place? In order to make you understand that, you must have heard a joke in which 4 friends thought to pool up money to buy a car to run as a taxi. So they pooled up money, bought a car to run as a taxi. The first day, nobody hired their car. Why? Because all 4 of them kept sitting inside the car, so nobody found it unoccupied. So nobody hired their car. So they were told, please get down from your car. Let the car be unoccupied so that people can hire it. So next day they did get down from the car, but their car did not start. So they kept pushing the car the whole day, but the car did not move even an inch. Why? Because 2 of them were pushing the car from front to back, and 2 of them were pushing from back to front. So the car did not move at all. So they were told to push in the same direction. Then only the car will move. So likewise, we have to have an alignment between the institute vision, mission and department vision, mission. Suppose institute vision, mission is taking you in this direction, the department vision, mission is in this direction, you will end up nowhere. They have to be aligned. Institute vision, mission and department vision, mission should be enacting in the same direction, right? So now, after the alignment is ensured, you have to do a consultation process, carry out an consultation process from the faculty, from the industry, from the management, data on future. Then only you will be futuristic. Otherwise, you will become the minimal model, right? So data on future. You extrapolate 15 years, 20 years, and that will set the expiry of your vision mission also. How far in future have you considered the data for? Professional bodies, parents, you do a consultation process with all of them. See, consultation does not mean that you take their views as it is. You consult them. There will be 2 benefits from it. Firstly, you will get good views. Secondly, they will feel involved. They will help you in achieving that vision and mission, because they will think that we have been made a part of the articulation process. So you take their views, you come up with the first draft. Then you go back, show the first draft to faculty, industry, management, data on future, professional bodies, parents. They might suggest again. If those suggestions are substantial, come up with the version 2.0. If their suggestions are minor in nature, come up with 1.1. Go back to them again. Take iterations, cycles, and then only you arrive to the vision and mission. Even after having followed that process, your vision mission does not have to be carved in stone. They are not forever. You have to decide the expiry date. Look, we will revisit the vision and mission after 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, whatever. That you have to set at the time of articulation of vision mission itself. So this is the process of vision and mission articulation that you have to follow. As an example, I'll share the vision and mission of the engineering college that I teach at. My purpose is not to force this vision mission on you, because every institution is unique in some way or the other. So follow the process and come up with your own vision and mission. And once again, if you take the vision and mission of my engineering college, your stakeholders will not put their heart and mind to achieve that vision and mission, because that will be alien to them. They have not been consulted. The process have not been followed. So I'm just sharing as an example. So since I was the principal of the college, so I had to design I had to articulate the vision and mission of the college. So I had to fall in line or alignment with the vision of the founder. So in line with the vision of the founder, Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, the Zakir Hussain College of Engineering and Technology has always stood for peaceful coexistence, academic excellence, and scientific temper. These were the vision points of the founder. So in line with that, we designed the vision of our engineering college to become an institution of excellence. So we aligned with academic excellence in scientific from here. And since we are an engineering college, that is why we added technical education and research with the standards at par with national and international institutes of repute, and to serve as quality human resource provider to the society and industry. So that is how, in line with the vision of the founder, we came up, after following the process, after the consultation process, we came up with the vision of our engineering college. Now, in order to reach this vision, we had to set up shorter mission statements to offer state-of-the-art UG, PG doctoral programs, to make policies and atmosphere to attract and retain best faculty, to create an ambience in which new ideas and cutting-edge research flourish through effective curriculum and infrastructure, so as to produce the leaders and innovators of tomorrow, to produce ethically strong and morally elevated human resource to serve mankind, to undertake collaborative projects and consultancy for long-term interaction with the academia and industry, to be among top 10 engineering institutes of India. So as we will keep meeting our mission statements, a day would come when we would meet our vision statement also, right? So this was about the first two levels of the outcome-based education pyramid, vision and mission. Now let us look at the next two levels, PEO and PO. What is the difference between PEO and PO? Program educational objectives, PEO, are the qualities that the graduates should have 4 or 5 years after graduation. How did they self-develop after graduation? Somebody became an entrepreneur, somebody became a teacher, somebody became a businessman, somebody became a managing director. So how did they grow into their careers? At the time of graduation, we did not teach them how to become an entrepreneur or a teacher or a businessman, right? So PEO are the qualities that the matured graduates should have. POs, on the other hand, program outcomes are aligned with graduate attributes, the qualities that the students, that the graduates should have at the time of graduation, right? So this is the difference between PEO and PO. Let me give you an example to elaborate my point further. Suppose we talk about a fruit, mangoes for instance. Mangoes are ripe, program outcome. Now this mango will go into the market. People will judge them. How does it taste? How does it smell? How does it appear? That is program educational objectives. Fruit is ripe, is program outcome, and how does it taste, smell, or appear? That is program educational objectives, right? Now, what should be the process of defining of PEOs? Once again, we have to follow the process. Institute vision mission, we aligned the department vision mission with the institute vision mission, right? With department vision mission, we have to align the program educational objectives. This alignment process has to be throughout the pyramid, from top to bottom, right? Then I do the consultation process from the faculty, students, data on future, alumni, graduate attributes, industry, professional bodies. Their views will be collected by the program coordinator. Their views will be summarized by the program assessment committee, and their views will either be accepted or recommended for review. 1 cycle, 2 cycle, you go back to the stakeholders, form version 2.0, 2.1, 2.2, 3.0. After several rounds of iterations, the program educational objectives will be accepted by the department advisory board. Right? Once again, whatever is accepted by the department advisory board, it is not to be carved in stone. You have to attach an expiry date that these program educational objectives are good for next 15 years, 10 years, 12 years, whatever. Right? So this is the process that you have to follow while defining the program educational objectives. Now, in order to understand program outcomes, we have to understand the graduate attributes first, because we have to align the program educational objectives with the graduate attributes. You must have seen. So what are the graduate attributes? I have listed 12 graduate attributes. Since I belong to the branch of engineering, I have given engineering knowledge. You may replace engineering by your branch of knowledge, science knowledge, arts knowledge, whatever. So these 12 attributes are engineering knowledge, or your branch knowledge, let me say, problem analysis, design and development of solutions. This problem analysis is a very important step. You must have heard about Steve Jobs. He used to say that if you can define a problem, you have found half the solution. If you have defined the problem properly, you have achieved half the solution. That is why those of you who have completed your PhDs, you must be realizing that the problem definition of your PhD program is the most important step. And we falter there. As a human being, our tendency is to choose an easy problem. Look, with an easy problem, we'll have to give the most comprehensive solution. Again, let us take an example of an athlete. The athlete is given a choice of how high the hurdles he wants to keep. As a human being, he'll say, let me keep 2 feet hurdle so that I can cross it easily. With 2 feet hurdle, there is not much challenge in the hurdle height. So now each and every step will be watched. How did he start? What was the rhythm? How was the poise? How did he take off? How did he land? If he stumbled, his marks will be deducted. On the contrary, if an athlete says that I'll cross a 10 feet hurdle, now nobody will look at his speed or rhythm or poise or takeoff and landing. Everybody is looking at the bar because the bar is challenging. If he somehow crosses the bar, he'll get the medal. Or even while crossing the bar, he touched the bar with his toes and the bar falls down, he'll still get the clap because the challenge had been high. So we should choose, I'm not saying that choose a 100 feet hurdle, otherwise you'll get dejected. So my point is to choose such a problem which is slightly above your reach, so that you have to stretch in order to solve that problem. So problem analysis is a very important step. Then design and development of solutions. Obviously, you don't have to leave it at the problem level. You have to find solutions. Investigation of complex problems. It shouldn't be that if the problem is easy, I'll solve it. If it is complex, I'll leave it. We should have the confidence of taking up the complex problems also. Then modern tool usage is very important. Suppose I'm asked to dig a field and I come up with the old tools for digging. Somebody who has the advanced tool, he'll have an edge. He'll outspeed me. So as and when a modern tool comes into the market, we should have the tendency of embracing that modern tool. Again, let me tell you a story. there was a vice chancellor at our university, Professor M.N. Farooqi. He was a professor from IIT Kharagpur. So he used to say then, late 80s, early 90s, he used to say then, there was a time if somebody didn't know English, he was supposed to be an illiterate person. And then he used to add, now is the time that if somebody doesn't know computers, he will be treated as illiterate. If I continue in the same fashion, I can say for today that if somebody doesn't know artificial intelligence, he will be treated as illiterate. Remember the days when computers came, we were thinking that computers are meant for computer people only. But now, today, everybody is using computers. The arts people, the social science people, the accounts people, everybody is using. Computers become a tool. Those who learned to use computers, they oversped. And those who did not, those who hesitated in learning computers, they were left behind. So similarly, AI is the tool today. It is not confined just for the computer scientists or the electronics people. Let everybody embrace the artificial intelligence tool that has come in market, and we should use it. Again, AI is not the end in itself. It is a means to the end. I tell my student, go for ChatGPT essay, I don't mind, but don't submit it as it is. You can take it as the starting point. You apply your eye to it. You know what is the paradox about AI? The paradox about AI is that it presupposes I. In order to have AI, you need to have I first. So it should not, AI should not be the end. That should be the beginning. And then you apply your eye to it, your intelligence to it, and refine that essay further. So modern tool usage is a very important graduate attribute. Then engineer and society. Let me throw a question at you. Have you ever wondered why Silicon Valley is Silicon Valley? My answer to this question is Silicon Valley is Silicon Valley because Stanford University and University of California at Berkeley are there. These two giant universities have developed an ecosystem around them. Their graduates created startups. Those startups became success stories. They started employing more graduates from these universities. They started funding these universities. They even started employing the faculty members from these universities into their companies. So they developed an ecosystem around them. In the history of the United States, all the development was in the East Coast first. California became prosperous because of these universities. Now in India, we have some very good institutions. We have IITs, IIMs, central universities, NITs. But unfortunately, outside the four walls of the IITs or IIMs, a rickshaw puller, a tea seller, or a hawker just doesn't know what this IIT, IIM is all about. So the benefits are not percolating down to society. So we have to be sensitive to the societal needs whenever we talk about the outcome-based education. Then next is environment and sustainability. I have no hesitation in admitting that we engineers are the biggest culprit of destroying the environment. Because out of our enthusiasm, we overdo things. When we were young, this polythene came into market. Everybody was overjoyed. Wonder material, so light, so thin, waterproof, insulator. We overproduce plastics. Now we are crying hoax. It's not decaying. It is becoming an environmental hazard. I read somewhere, we learn from history that we do not learn from history. Yes. We learn from history that we do not learn from history. We are still not taking lessons out of our polythene experience. Everybody is talking about solar energy, solar energy. So many solar panels we are planting without thinking what will happen to these solar panels 20 years, 25 years from now, when we will discard these solar panels, that will be a new environmental hazard. I don't say that we should not go for the non-conventional energy resources. My only point is that we have to be careful whenever we are doing things, and we should not overdo things for sure. So environment and sustainability is a very important program outcome or the graduate attribute. Then ethics. You take ethics out of an engineer, he or she will sell the whole country. So ethics have to be a very important graduate attribute. Individual and teamwork, we should be capable of working alone, and we should be equally capable of working in a team. Collaboration, a very important part. You know what is the first lesson of collaboration given to us? Remember those maths questions in schools. If 4 people can do this work in 10 days, how many days will 5 people take to complete this job? That was the first lesson in collaboration, right? So we should know how to collaborate, and we should also have the confidence of working independently if the situation so demands. A good player is the one who has a good score by himself and who also plays for the team. He's a team player. Communication is a very important graduate attribute. The only thing that differentiates between the modern system of medicine and our traditional system of medicine is the communication or the lack of it. In the modern systems of medicine, we have come to a level where we are doing heart transplant. We are putting the hearts of the animals into the human beings. However, with our traditional systems of medicine, either the Hakims or the Veds, they were very good Veds and Hakims, but they didn't pass on their knowledge to even their children, leave alone others. They took their knowledge with them to the graves or to the Shamshan Ghat. So everybody had to reinvent the wheel. Everybody had to start from the scratch. Whereas in the modern system of medicine, they kept communicating. So people started doing the work from where the previous one had left. That will be possible only when you are communicating. Then lifelong learning. Learning does not stop the day you graduate. If somebody says that, look, I've done BTech, that is the end of it. No, this is the beginning now. Somebody does MBBS and says this is the end of it. No. You were studying so far, now you have to practice. Let me tell you a joke. You know what is the difference between bachelor's, master's and PhD? When you study and you realize that you know everything, they give you the bachelor's degree. If you study further and as soon as you realize that you know nothing, they give you the master's degree. If you work further and when you realize that neither you know anything, nor does anyone else, they give you a PhD. That is very true. Those of you who have completed PhD already must appreciate this that much more. So learning has to be lifelong. We have to keep unlearning and learning, right? Project management and finance. Everything runs on money. So we have to be very particular about the financial viability of our project. Management of the project. Suppose I am designing a bridge, I must complete it before the floods come. If I do not manage it properly, the floods come, even the bridge or the dam would be wiped off. So all these graduate attributes are the qualities that the graduate should have at the time of graduation. So this is the description that I've already discussed, so I'm skipping these slides. Now, aligned with those graduate attributes, you have to come up with the program outcomes, which is the 4th layer in our pyramid. I hope you remember, right? Vision at the top, mission below it, PEOs, we discussed already, and then the POs. They have to be aligned with the graduate attributes. So program outcomes are narrower statements that describe what students are expected to know and be able to do by the time of graduation, right? What are the guidelines for the POs? Program outcomes basically describe knowledge, skills, and behavior of students as they progress through the program as well as by the time of graduation. They should not be too broad. They must align with graduate attributes. They must reflect all the graduate attributes, and they should contribute to achieve PEOs. Right? So upward compatibility has to be there. They should contribute to achieve the PEOs, and they must cover all the graduate attributes. Right? Again, what should be the process of defining POs? Very similar to that of PEOs. So I'll hurriedly go through it. Institute and department vision mission, you had aligned the program educational objectives with that. Now POs have to be aligned with the program educational objectives. Then you do the consultation process from faculty, student, data on future, alumni, industry, professional bodies, graduate attributes. Their views will be collected by the program coordinator. The views will be summarized by the program assessment committee. The views will be accepted with or without review by the department advisory board. Again, once those POs are defined, they are not to be carved in stone. An expiry date has to be attached, and after the expiry date, the POs have to be revisited in order to relay them or to change them or to continue with them as such, right? There is a new term that has recently come up, PSO. Program is specific outcome. What is the difference between PO and PSO? In the case of PO, there has to be a one-to-one alignment with graduate attributes. 12 graduate attributes, 12 POs. In the case of program specific outcomes, they have to be lesser in number and very specific to a program. In order to make you understand what is PSO, let me give you an example. Take it as an example, not a political statement I'm making. 3 universities you take: Aligarh Muslim University, Banaras Hindu University, and Jawaharlal Nehru University. MA in history will be taught in all these 3 universities. So the POs of MA in history will be same across all these 3 universities. But their PSOs may differ. AMU may say that our PSO is medieval history. BHU may say that our PSO is ancient history. JNU may say that our PSO is modern history. We know these 3 phases of history. So program specific outcomes are specific to a program, focused outcomes. Suppose BSc in chemistry is being taught at several institutions, their POs will be same, but their PSOs may differ. Some institution may say that our PSO for BSc in chemistry is organic chemistry. Someone may say that our PSO is physical chemistry, and so on. So this is the difference between POs and PSOs. The last level is the course outcome. First thing, they have to be student focused, not professor focused, which means learning oriented, not coverage oriented. What the students must learn, not what I can teach, not what the professor can teach. Instead, what the students must learn. There has to be alignment between course, program, and institutional levels. All these levels, the first 2 levels are institution levels, vision, mission. The next 2 levels are program levels, PEOs and POs. The last one is course level. So course outcome, program outcome, and PEOs, and institutional levels are vision, mission. Focus on ability is central to the discipline. Suppose your syllabus is unit wise, 4 units. Keep the central theme of every unit as 1 course outcome. So 4 unit, 4 course outcomes, right? Focus on aspects of learning that will endure. Again, let me share an experience with you. When I was doing PhD at IIT Delhi, there was this foreign diplomat who was visiting IIT Delhi. So he asked one of the professors of computer science at IIT Delhi what programming language do you teach your students? The response of the professor of computer science from IIT Delhi was an eye opener for me. You know what he said? He said, we don't teach them language, we teach them programming. The languages may keep coming and going. There was a time when Fortran was there. Then Pascal came, C, C++, C Sharp, Java. Today Python is there. Tomorrow some other language might come. So if we just teach them language, as soon as that language goes out of market, our graduates will go out of market. Instead, if we teach them programming, a new language comes, they can adopt to the syntax of that new. So we have to have the aspects of learning that will endure. They are limited to manageable number. There should not be too many that we are not able to manage them. And last but not the least, and that is why I put in bold, specific enough to be measurable. They should not be weak. They should not be vague. Because this is most important. If we can't measure, we won't be able to control. Right? So these are the guidelines for the course outcomes. Now we'll have to briefly look at the Bloom's taxonomy levels. I need to connect it with the outcome-based education given by Benjamin Bloom. Let me go to the levels straight away. The first level of learning is knowledge. On top of it is comprehension. On top of it is application. To know is not enough. Suppose I memorize earth is round, earth is round, earth is round. That is knowledge. What do I mean by earth is round? Is it circular? Is it elliptical? Is it oval? Is it flattened? I need to comprehend. What do I mean by earth is round? Then application. Earth rotates. Days and nights are formed. It revolves. Seasons change. So these three levels, knowledge, comprehension, application. In order to understand analysis and synthesis, let me give you suppose there is a system, right? That could be a computer system. By the way, what is the difference between a computer and a computer system? That will tell you the difference of what a system is. The hardware that you see is the computer. When you attach software to it, you give it the power supply, and there is a user to operate, then it becomes a computer system. So something which delivers is a system. So suppose there is a computer system or an electronic system or a mechanical system or a political system or a social system, there will be an input and there will be an output, right? If I know the input, I know the system, I have to find out the output, that is analysis. If I know the input, I know the output, I have to find out the system, that is synthesis, which is more challenging. So the challenge of learning is going up. Knowledge to comprehension to application to analysis to synthesis. And then evaluation is there at the top, because if you can't assess, you won't be able to control. Then there was the taxonomy level revisited by Anderson and Krathwohl in 2001. So most of the levels were retained. Knowledge to remember, comprehension to understand, application to apply. Analysis and synthesis were collapsed into one level to analyze. They were combined in one level, right? Then evaluation, and a level was added to create. With regards to creation, you must have heard three terms: invention, innovation, and discovery. What is the difference between invention and innovation? What is the difference between invention and innovation? Please mute. Please mute. Yes. All right. So what is the difference between invention and innovation? Suppose to go from point A to B, there was no known path. Somebody came up with a path to go from A to B. That is invention. Now the path exists. Somebody comes up with a better route from A to B. That is innovation. If the path didn't exist and somebody came up with the path, that is invention. The path existed, but somebody came up with a better route, that is innovation. Now, in order to understand the difference between invention and discovery, let me tell you a joke. A child asked his father, "Dad, what is the difference between invention and discovery?" The father said, "Son, look, it is like this. I discovered your mom and then we invented you. Something which is already existing, you find it out, that is discovery. Something which didn't exist and you created it, that is invention." So Columbus discovered America. Columbus did not invent America. America was already there, he discovered it. So these three terms, invention, innovation, and discovery, they are a part of the highest taxonomy level, which is to create. So analysis, synthesis, evaluation, or for that matter, creation also, they are the higher order thinking skills. Every student should have knowledge, comprehension, application. Only the bright students will go to analysis, synthesis, evaluation, and creation. So OB steps are define outcomes, then design curriculum, deliver instructions, document results. Very important. Documentation, communication, very important. Suppose you change the job tomorrow. So all your energies will be wasted because you didn't document it. Suppose we retire. So all our good work has gone waste because we didn't document it. So let other people take advantage of it. So let us document whatever we do and then determine advancements. If we do all this, we measured but we didn't enhance, then obviously all my exercise has gone waste. So these are the OB steps. Now I'm going to share with you a very important figure which looks complicated, but if you can devote a little attention with me, I'll be able to explain both the assessment of outcomes and the control of it. Measurement and control, both I'll explain using this figure. So please be with me. For example's sake, I'm taking a program, BE in EEE. You can take BSc in chemistry or MA in history, whatsoever. Remember, in this pyramid, I said that assessment has to go from bottom to up. So first we have to assess the course outcome, then program outcome, then PEOs, then mission, then vision. So in order to assess the COs first, there has to be two components, the direct component and the indirect component. The direct component comes from the result. Suppose I framed the question paper in such a way that question 1 was from unit 1 and unit 1, the central theme was CO1. So what is the average score of marks in question 1, which is unit 1, will be taken as the direct component of CO1. Right? CO2 comes from unit 2. So questions from unit 2, how much is the average marks scored by students in the class? That will be the direct component of CO attainment. Right? This direct component has to be combined with the indirect component, which is the feedback from the students at the end of the course. You ask these students, how much do you think you have got CO1 in you? How much you've got CO2, CO3, CO4? Let them say, take the average of it. That will be the indirect component. Combine the direct component, indirect component in 70-30 ratio, 75-25 or 80-20. You must be wondering, where is this 70-30, 75-25, 80-20 comes from? See, whatever you set, you declare it in the beginning of the course. It should not be that when the results come, you start adjusting them. The result is good, so let me increase the direct component, let me decrease the indirect component. The feedback is good, so let me increase the no. The rules of the game have to be told before the game begins. So whatever you set in the beginning. You say, you declare that 70% weightage will be given to direct component, the result of the course, and 30% will be given to the feedback from the students, right? So together they will form the CO assessment. Now the CO assessment will become the direct component for PO assessment of all those POs where those COs were mapped. So that will be the direct component for PO attainment. To it, you combine the indirect component by virtue of the alumni survey or the exit graduate feedback. At the time of graduation, ask these students, how much do you think you have PO1 in you? You have PO2 in you, PO3, take the average. Ask the alumni, you graduated from here, how much do you think you had PO1 in you, PO2 in you, PO3? Combine them. Maybe take the direct component of CO evaluation 80%, 10% alumni, and 10% exit graduate feedback, or whatever you decide, declare it in the beginning. This will become the indirect component for the direct component for PEO evaluation. To it, you combine the alumni survey and the employer survey. Ask the employers, those graduates who graduated 5 years ago and have joined your company, how are they performing? Take their feedback. Likewise, the senior alumni who have graduated 4 or 5 years ago, at least take their view on the PEOs. So this alumni survey is different from this one. This one is all the alumni, whereas this one is for the senior alumni only, right? So that will become the PEO evaluation. That will become the direct component for mission. Take the indirect component, that will become the direct component of vision. Take the feedback from, say, management, from society, from government, the funding agency, and so on. So this line explains the assessment of attainment of learning outcomes. The story doesn't end here, because now you have to improve upon it. So you take the assessment of CO and compare it with the target that you had set for yourself. See the difference between the two. That is why you have plus minus here. In the case of direct indirect component, you had plus, you were adding them up. But with the target CO and the achieved CO, you have to find out the difference. Likewise, achieved PO and the target PO, find out the difference. Achieved PEO and the target PEO, find out the difference. All these differences have to be put together. OB admin will propose the improvement so that this gap is narrowed down. So the next time when you run the program, it will be a better program. So this has to be a continuous cycle. Assessment and then improvement. Assessment and improvement, right? So this one figure explains the assessment as well as the improvement. How does the OB admin propose the improvement? I'll come to it a little later. So I'll skip a few slides because we are running out of time. These are just the explanation that I've been giving anyway. For example, indirect assessment tools could be course outcome feedback, exit student feedback, alumni feedback, industrial feedback, which could be in the form of vocational or summer training or internship, jobs in the industry. You can also take internationally, nationally normed examinations, GATE performance, NET, CAT, GRE, IELTS, TOEFL as the indirect component. So it is for you to decide, but whatever you decide, you declare it. Now, evaluation for improvement. How does OB admin improves? See, the result of assessment is used for curricular improvements, three-dimensional improvements. Either you improve the curriculum, or you improve the delivery, or you revise, redefine the POs in themselves, right? So this three-dimensional improvement has to be brought in. So the OB framework is like this. See, this is the institution level. mission, vision. This is program level, PEO and PO. This is course level. So there is a continuous cycle of assessment, improvement, assessment, improvement, assessment, improvement in all of them. You can take the input of the industry and professional organizations and their feedback as well in this OBE framework. So the process for redefining of POs, again, you go back to the alumni, the graduate survey, industry, program coordinator, module coordinator, POs assessment, faculty views. Is there a need for redefining POs? Yes. If the curriculum has to be changed, go to Board of Studies. If the delivery methods and course outcomes have to be changed, go to the program module coordinator. If the POs themselves have to be changed, go to the program assessment committee, and department advisory board will finally accept it with or without review. Right? So this is the process for redefining of POs. When to assess? PEOs few years after graduation, 4 to 5 years, program outcomes upon graduation, and course outcomes at the completion of every course every semester. Right? So redefining process of PEOs is that very similar to that of POs. Alumni survey, graduate survey, industry, program coordinator, module coordinator, POs assessment, faculty views. Is there a need for redefining POs? Yes. Identify the changes. If they are in curriculum, go to the Board of Studies. If they are in regulations, go to the Academic Council. If the PEOs themselves have to be changed, go to the Program Assessment Committee, and then the Department Advisory Board will finally accept. Right? So this is the entire process of formulating the outcome-based education and assessing it. Thank you very much. I'll take questions now if there are any.
Dear participants, if you have any queries related to this topic, you can ask now.
Yes. Are there any questions, please? Any questions, any comment, any suggestion?
अब लीव
Please
कर
keep
दे मैम.
yourself muted for some more time. Yes. See, if you're not asking questions, either of the two things, either you have understood everything or you haven't understood anything. I don't know which side you'll lie.
Hello. Hello.
Yeah, go ahead, go ahead.
Good evening, sir. Sir, that was my question for that NAC grade you said about that one. I just want to know about that one. How we are getting A++, and A+ grade? Is there something? What is different between them, sir?
There are the criteria that has to be followed. 70% is to be done by the machine previously. 10% was the feedback and 20% was evaluated by the team. And based on that score, if you lie above 3.5, between 3.5 and 4, there was A++. Between 3.26 and 3.5 was A+, and 3.0 to 3.24 or 25, it was A. Right, and below that was B+, and so on. This used to be the criteria, but NAC keeps changing. So you may expect new things now from NAC. All right.
Yeah. One more thing is there, sir. Like I asked about what's the criteria for autonomous colleges, something like that. If any college is becoming autonomous, what is the criteria for that one? Like as normal
for autonomy,
college?
yeah, for autonomy, you have to have the accreditation in the first place. Because the accreditation ensures you a couple of things. Firstly, there is a minimum level of quality that will have to be attained, and also that mutual recognition will have to be in place. So that is your starting point. And then they add a few more requirements so that when you meet them, you get the autonomy. Right?
Okay, sir, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Any other thing? Any other question, comment, suggestion from anybody?
So I have one question, sir.
Yeah, go ahead.
So if you talk about the assessments, it differs from one department to another department. How it can be managed when it comes to the overall rating and then when they're applying for accreditation,
Mhm.
how this works out?
Yeah, you have to maintain the course file in which you have to have the lesson plan, you have to have the syllabus, and then all the assignments, all the question papers, their evaluation. And then before the end of the course and before submitting your grades, you have to submit the course file with the assessment of attainment of course outcomes, right? Based on the criteria that I've told you. CO1, how much average marks they have scored, how much average feedback that has got. Combine the two. So CO assessment of attainment that has to be submitted along with the result every semester.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Any other question? Okay, then thank you very much for your patient listening. Over to the course coordinator.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your valuable presentation. Let me call Manogari, Assistant Professor of Crescent College of Education, to propose vote of thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's my honor and privilege to deliver vote of thanks for today's enlightening session on outcome-based education delivered by our esteemed Professor Sufyan Beg from the Department of Computer Science, AMU, Aligarh. On behalf of Crescent College of Education for Women and all the participants here today, I extend our heartfelt gratitude to Professor Sufyan Beg for sharing your deep insights and expertise on such a vital and timely topic, outcome-based education. Sir, you have explained clearly about the levels of quality in education and accreditation, significance of accreditation, global mobility, accreditation models, articulation of vision and mission in a nice and easy manner. Your session has truly shed light on the importance of shifting from traditional content-based teaching to outcome-based education was really superb. That is more students quality-centric as outcome-based approach. Sir, you have explained many complex concepts, that is outcome-based education idea, into small steps as curriculum, delivery, and assessment. And the clear expression using pyramid were mind-blowing. The way you express the articulation of vision, mission was both engaging and easy to grasp. The explanation about PEOs and POs and the differentiation between POs and PSOs were explained to the core. The way you integrate the course outcomes with Bloom's taxonomy, OBE steps and OBE diagram, OBE processing diagram was highly commendable, sir. The examples you shared from real academic and institutional settings added great value and clarity to our understanding. We came to know that in the rapidly evolving field of education, aligning our educational objectives with real world outcomes is no longer optional, but it is essential. Sir, your talk about graduate attributes and how these graduate attributes are aligned with program outcomes, which highly inspired us all to rethink about how we teach, how we assess, and how we guide our students towards bringing competent professionals and lifelong learners. I deeply admire your expertise in academics and your passion towards explaining the things. Once again, I thank Professor Sufyan Beg for taking the time to be with us today and for making this session so impactful and useful. We are immensely grateful to you, sir. Thank you, sir. Next, I would also like to thank our director, Dr. Faiza Madam, and our coordinator, Dr. Magdum Marifa Ma'am, for organizing this event and each participant for your active involvement and thoughtful questions. Thank you all.
Network connection is இருக்குன்னு சொல்றாங்க.
Okay, then I'll take leave now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you,
so
sir.
much.
Thank you.
I'll leave the session now.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
sir.
sir. Thank you.
Participants all must join at 4:30 p.m. for the second session. இதுல நெட்வொர்க் இருக்குன்னு தானே இஷ்யூ இருக்குன்னு தானே கொண்டு வர ரெண்டுமே இருக்குதுன்னா என்ன பண்ண